And our time we have here, we have to bring together the cohesiveness between the body and the being in the body. The manipulation of human DNA is one of the things that creates the interference between us living a completely 3D physical life or us living soulfully into the 3D life. Life in this physicality is so short, we're only here for a few winters. You're listening to the Transform Your Life from the Inside Out podcast. This episode is titled Conversations with a Sorcerer, How to Meditate 24/7, Part 2. Long title, I know. Anyway, this is a continuation of the last episode where we talked about how to be, not how to do meditation, but how to be in meditation 24/7. So what we're going to do in this episode is pick up from the last one, and I want to build in some more pieces for you. Keep listening. How to be in meditation 24/7, part 2. In the last episode, we talked about meditation and being in meditation 24/7. Basically, we talked about living in a meditation. Now, as I said in the last episode, many of us do meditation as opposed to being in meditation. We do it as a practice, as an application, as an activity, as opposed to being and living in that state of being, that state of mind. Now, if you're new to the podcast, when I mention the name Don Xavier, I'm talking about my brother-in-law, a shaman. He's not the Don Xavier that you will find on YouTube. As a matter of fact, my brother-in-law has no social media presence whatsoever. And anyway, if you're new, go back to the very beginning as well, because I promise, and as you'll find, you will get benefit from many, many, many of these episodes. The purpose of this episode is, the foundation is this, is that many of us have heard before that we are not predominantly physical beings. We are human beings. We think that we are human beings having a physical experience, but really are spiritual beings. But really what we are is spiritual beings having a human experience. Let me say that again. I got tongue twisted, and I've known this phrase for 20 years. Many of us think that we are human beings having a spiritual experience when it's the reverse of that. Truly, we are spiritual beings first, and we are currently having a human experience. Okay, so I got it out. I'm going to continue with the episode here in the conversation of Don Xavier. And we have to grow and we have to live from the non-physical, meaning the spiritual part of us first. But many of us do not do that because we actually choose, many of us, it's a lack of awareness, we choose to live in the physical, the smallest part of who we are. And because we do this, many of us live backwards. We live from the outside in. And the way that I'm talking about dovetails with the title of this entire podcast, From the Inside Out. So you may remember that I mentioned before, as I'm doing episodes from Conversations of Don Xavier, he can start somewhere in a conversation. And generally when he starts a conversation, it might be 1 o'clock in the morning, literally. And sometimes, he'll talk till 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, taking those of us that work with him to different plateaus, different places, higher awareness and higher understanding. But as I've said before, many times he can start here and then go 84 different places, but he always returns back to the main lessons. And someone that actually is kind of new to working with him said that it's amazing how he can go 20 different directions and then weave it back to one point. Now, I tell you that because I'm going to move around to several different places in this episode and perhaps the next one, and pretty much any episode where I'm recapitulating what he shared with us, I'm going to jump around in different places, but my attempt is to tie it back together for you. So in this episode, we're still talking about meditation. And like I just said, I'm going to jump around, but I will tie it back together for you, or I will do the best that I can. And even if I can't do it as well as what you might want, you're going to get nuggets from the episode. So I'm going to pick up here with a quote from him. He said, "Life in this physicality is so short, we're only here for a few winters." Now, what he means by that, obviously, is that we're not here very long. And a metaphor that I use with people, imagine a lightning strike in your life. You're driving along, you're outside, whatever it might be, and you see a lightning strike. Well, the thing about that lightning strike, if you look at the totality of the essence of you, meaning your soul energy and the totality of that, that's infinite. And this lifetime is minuscule, akin to the lightning strike, which is minuscule in the context of your current physical life. I mean, think about, a lightning strike you might have saw when you were 8 years old. And I'm just using that as an example. But that was a long time ago. But in that moment, it was very real to you. But the point is, it comes and goes. And you on this planet, you're going to come and go very, very quickly. And we're here for a reason. We have to grow. We have to evolve. But his point was, in our time, and these are exact words from him, in our short time on the planet, we have to bring together the cohesiveness between the body and the being in the body. I'll repeat that again. In our time we have here, we have to bring together the cohesiveness between the body and the being in the body. We have to create the link between the body and the divine being in the body. Now, he did mention, and I have not asked for his permission to share this, so I'm going to change the wording a little bit. But for example, we as humans live by many different codes or many different creeds. So what I'd request you ask yourself is, what codes and what creeds do you live by? What codes and creeds rule your life? And you can call them whatever you want to call them, but they're principles that we live by. And he was talking to all of us about, we want to live by creeds or codes or ways of being that help us merge the inner spirituality, the inner self, our true spiritual essence, with the outside of us. Now, let me give you a tangible example. Speaking of these creeds or codes or ways of being, whatever you want to call them, I was talking to somebody a couple of nights ago that's worked with Don Xavier now for about 20 years, actually 21, 22 years. And he was saying at dinner about his creeds that he's living from, because we were talking about this. And he was saying, well, in shamanism, one of the most important things you can do is conserve your energy. So one of the creeds that I live by is to conserve my energy. And he did mean that in a 3D physical way, because he tends to be a doer. I mean, he's constantly going and going and going and going. And he recognized that was depleting his energy and creating an imbalance between his inner self and his outer self, between the divineness in him and the ordinary 3D physical being. So one of the creeds that he now lives by, which is what Don Xavier is talking about, what codes or creeds or ways of being do you choose to live by that helps you foster a relationship between the divine being in you and the body? I want to repeat that again. That's an exact quote from Don Xavier, and it's just so sublime to me and so simple. But what ways of being foster the relationship between the divine being in the body and the body, which is basically you merging the dualism of you, the body and the divine mind. So this can be very subtle for any of you, but ponder this. And you might be thinking, okay, well, what kind of codes, How would I know what codes or creeds or ways of being to live by? That's a wonderful question. But ponder this and think about this. Think about when you are in complete peace of mind. Think about when you are in bliss. Think about when you are in flow. Think about, for many of you listening, you are clairaudient, clairvoyant, clairsentient, might not even identify as that, but you might feel like maybe you don't belong on the planet. You maybe get things before other people. You might have very in tune intuition, knowing, but that's what I'm talking about. When are you in this knowing? Because when you're in that place, that is the way to be and the place to live from that creates the bridge from the higher and the lower. So question is, what creates the interference between, I'm going to use these words, I've used them before, the little me. Now the little me would be, for example, this container of skin, Jim Fortin, sitting here physically. But the big me, the little me and the big me, the little me is the container of skin. The big me, metaphorically speaking, is the soul energy that inhabits this container of skin. So ask yourself, and I'll talk about this later in the episode or the next episode, what creates the interference between the little you and the bigger part of you? I want to jump around here, as I'd mentioned in this episode and I have before. What I'm going to share is not exclusive to Don Xavier talking about it, because you might have read about it in different places. Many of you, I wouldn't be surprised at all if you said, yeah, Jim, I heard that before, I read that. And especially if you're reading any kind of ancient text or any kind of ancient wisdom, or perhaps more esoteric things. I'll leave it at that. But something that is pretty much a foundation of what I'm talking about, and I'm going to go somewhere with this, is the manipulation of human DNA. The manipulation of human DNA is one of the things that creates the interference between us living a completely 3D physical life or us living soulfully into the 3D life. So, and I definitely am not going to go into, I don't have his permission to talk about it. You might know about it from other places. But what causes the manipulation of DNA? And he talks about in this conversation, and he has before many times, he's talked about the Huichol Indians or the Aboriginals. And he said, most human beings, because their DNA has been manipulated, they are operating from two strands of DNA. And what he said was, and he said this for probably 20 years now, is the more that we grow and evolve from the inside out, from the higher frequencies of ourself, the more we expand, and we're working from more than two strands of DNA. Because most of the population is only working from two strands of DNA, and it keeps them pretty much trapped in the 3D reality. And then he went on to say is that most humans have young DNA, as I've kind of already alluded to, that was genetically manipulated hundreds of thousands of years ago. But the point is, the more that we grow spiritually, the more access we have to higher resources of energy and mind and consciousness. And then we connect with all that. And then it kind of actually, I'm kind of feeling my way through this as I'm sharing it with you, because I'm trying to take his words and distill them where you guys can understand them. And I don't mean that in any kind of arrogant way. I'm trying to bring cogence and coherence to things that he's brought to me that I'm bringing to you guys. But here's the thing. The more we grow and evolve from a spiritual perspective, the more we want to grow and evolve. And then where he went is the more that we grow and evolve, the more we can capture beyond the intellectual. And the intellectual is completely 3D physical of the little self of the body. And what we want to do is grow the inner self, the divine self in us, to take us beyond the understanding of the 3D world. And I want to comment here. This is my comment. I learned this many, many years ago. In the 90s, his mentor, a shaman and a sorcerer, said to me, And he calls me Jaimito, which is Spanish for young James. And he said, Jaimito, you think too much. And when you think too much, you cannot fly. And I didn't understand that comment at that point because I was trying to analytically think about it. I remember doing ceremony on the spring equinox, 2 ceremonies in Teotihuacan with Don Xavier, and I believe it was 2005. And before we did the ceremonies, inside the pyramid of the moon and the sun, that entire facility, the president of Mexico gave us permission to go do ceremony there on the spring equinox. Don Xavier said to all of us that were there, if you try to think your way through what we're going to do, you will be lost. Now, my point to you is we live in a world where we are rewarded. Literally, we are rewarded for analytical 3D thinking. You think about school and think about all the gold stars you get. You know, in school, we're taught to be, air quotes, smart and analytical, and we're taught to think and to plan and to rationalize. And we have a system we've created as humans that rewards us for living that kind of way. But what I have found in my own self, my own experience, and the thousands of people that I work with, your intelligence is only going to get you so far because your intelligence is 3D analytical. Your intelligence is all learned material. Now, actually, when I say your intelligence, I mean that's innate, but I mean the things that you know because you've been encouraged to use your intelligence to know more things, facts and figures and numbers and statistics and ideas and concepts and all these kind of things. These are what I find. I find that the most analytical people are also many times the blindest people when it comes to bringing in their higher innate wisdom. I had a client one time, a Nobel Prize winning physician, and the man was obviously, as a Nobel Prize winner, very, very, very smart. But the challenge was, and I had noticed, there wasn't a lot of wisdom in the guy. There was a lot of smartness and a crazy smart guy, but not a lot of wisdom because he had disconnected himself from a lot of the inner wisdom by staying in his analytical 3D brain so much. So back to DX's comment. Part of the interference is us thinking and being in our head all the time. And the goal is, according to Don Xavier, back to the conversation, is to link the inner mind with the body. And the only way we can master that is through putting attention on cultivating and fostering this inner part of us, which is why I started a few minutes ago or mentioned about the codes. What codes or creeds or ways of being do you live by and from that fosters the inner growth and development and expansion of you? Because it snowballs, and then once you start developing the inner part of you, that expands and it grows even more. And then this goes back to the entire theme of these episodes, this one and the last one and maybe the next one. We better understand what it means to live in a meditation 24/7. Don Xavier went on to say, is we come with the awareness that this little us is us. And we think that this little us, Jim Fortin in my case, and whatever your name is, we think this little us is in control, but it's not in control. It's simply a part of the bigger aspect of our entire being. It's one little bitty part of the bigger part. Now, as I said, he hops around a lot, and hopefully we'll tie this together for you at the end. But he hopped around and he talked about choice. And many of you have heard me say before, and I learned this from him, that many of us think that life is choice, or life is a choice. And he taught me a long time ago that the ultimate choice that we make is the choice to incarnate. And then everything after we are born is all choice. Everything is choice. Listening to this podcast is choice. Listening to other episodes or not is choice. Growing spiritually is choice. Not growing is a choice, but we're always making the choice. And as he shared with me before, and I'm sharing with you, choice is your divine right. And no one can interfere with that because you have free will and you live in a universe of free will. And he's actually told me before there are other universes where they don't have free will, but you live in a universe of free will and you have choice. But he went on to say, relative to this conversation, if we make, and I'm going to use this word, bad choices, if we make bad choices, we pay the price for it. And the bigger point here is making the choice to live in the smallest part of ourself. It's a choice. And that choice actually hurts us, the evolution of the soul, while it's here incarnated in the body, and we're going to pay a price for that. And I want to point out that over the years, 28 years now watching him, his sole focus is only, and no matter what, and I do mean without exception, no matter what, spiritual evolution and growth. That comes beyond everything else, beyond money, beyond time, beyond how he's feeling physically. It comes no matter what. Now, again, hopping around, he went over, and I don't recall why he hopped over there, but he talked about the phrase, thank you. And I remember him many years ago saying there used to be a world we lived in, not in this incarnation, where those words weren't even part of language. And the reason that he says that, he was giving an example because he likes red wine, and he was talking to somebody that brought him a bottle of what he said was a really incredible red wine. And even though he does, when he's in your physical presence, is very kind and will say thank you and etc., many times, if you just drop something off at his house or whatever, you don't hear anything back. And in my early egotistical years, I was kind of like, what the hell? I mean, I'm doing X, Y, Z, and I did this and I did that, and I don't even get a freaking what the hell was I thinking back then? Looking at myself. Because where he goes on here is that he said there's no need to say thank you because it is said from the heart when the action is done. But he went further and he said there's a compensation that when you do something that helps someone, even if you don't get a thank you, you still get a compensation for that because thank you is all ego. So there's no need to say thank you because the universe will bring your compensations to you. In his words, the compensation is divine compensation, meaning a return of energy. And then he went on to say, that is the ancient way. And he went further to say, we all know this because we knew it in former incarnations, but we don't remember. Now, I want to postulate about why he was talking about this for a moment, meaning the compensations, because he's always said that when he does things for people, people come to him, and his waiting list right now is closed down because he has 800 people on his waiting list, and he works with each person individually. He charges pretty much next to nothing, and he can't get to the entire waiting list. And he said that whether people want to give me a love offering or not, which he never, and I am qualifying the word never, will never ask for it, he goes, it doesn't matter. I get my compensations from the universe. Now, my postulation is that he was talking about this in this conversation because when we place the emphasis on our spiritual growth and development, we get compensations from the universe for doing that. And those compensations are greater growth. And then the more that we grow, the more that we can grow. So in this conversation, he was talking, there was a mix of what we call veterans, meaning those that have been around for a long time, since the beginning of he's starting this path with people. And there's about a half a dozen of us that have been around for 28 years. But there were also new people in this conversation that might have been around a year or two. So I'm explaining different things here because, I recognize you probably don't work with a real shaman. Many of you don't. And so I'm hopping around a little bit to hopefully create some cogence and continuity for you. Okay, the next topic he went into was spiritual ego. And none of this is new to me because I've had my ass handed to me in a very nice way, but by him and another shaman that energetically I've worked with through him, Don Juan Matus, his mentor. And I have Don Juan once said to me, and this is a lot of years ago, he was tough. Don Xavier is very kind and very gentle, but Don Juan was tough, especially when you're a hard nut to crack like me, because I was like a very stubborn horse. I had to be broken, so to speak. But he said to me, and trust me, many of you, I'm sure you see it, and I'm still working on it. I've got my own lessons. But Don Juan said to me, he goes, to me personally, he goes, I have beat the ego out of you. And I have beat, and I have beat, and I have beat, and I have beat the ego out of you. And I will continue to beat the ego out of you, which is what he did. I felt like a punching bag in the early 2000s because every time I got to visit with Don Juan, I'd get punched all over. And I took it personally back then. I'm sharing here, but I learned that was the little me taking it personally, and it wasn't the bigger part of me that was growing. It was a littler part of me. Anytime we take things personally, that's the little part of us and not the divine part of us. Anyway, spiritual ego. He said most of us live from the little self, and we think, and I have been there and I've gotten my ass handed to me. Trust me on that one. Because many times we think, oh, I'm a big banana and I'm this and I'm that. And we become cocky and we become arrogant and egotistical, all these kind of big whatever things. And that's not who we are. That's simply the smallest part of ourselves. And when we're living from that part of ourselves, the ego and the arrogance and the cockiness and all these kinds of things. And look what I did. And do you know who I am? And things that people get, I don't ever say that, but things people get into, it's just such small self, cocky arrogance. And this is part of the distortion between us living from the smaller part of us and the larger part of us. As he went on to say, that's the little self and the little body crowding out the divine mind and the soul. And he went on to say, we have to be careful with the body taking over the divine being in the body. I'll repeat. We have to be careful with the body taking over the divine being in the body. And that one phrase, I'll read it again, and then we're going to wrap up this episode and I'll finish up in the next. We have to be careful with the body, meaning the little self, taking over the divine being in the body, because your soul is housed in the body. And he said, this is sacred doctrine, billions of years old. And then I remember him saying, I can't even put a number on it because it's older than humans' conception of numbers. But to put it in a way that humans can understand it, this is billions of years old. So what I want to do in this episode, I'll finish up the rest on the next episode, but I want to go here to the transformational takeaways, and I'm going to give them to you and just ponder these as we're going through these particular episodes. Now, I started this episode and I said, in our time, we have to bring together the cohesiveness between the body and the being in the body. So, things that I want to share with you are 4 points here. Number one is ideally we want to evolve and grow to where we're living meditation 24/7. And the pathway to that is to start living from the inside out, not the outside in. Meaning living from the divine aspect of us first, not the external 3D container of skin and identity that we are. Number three, which we did not talk about in this episode, which will be in the next episode, is getting out of the emotions. Fear, anger, worry, greed, shame. All these emotions run interference between the higher self and the lower self. And they cut us off from the higher self because we're living in the lower self. And these things are ego, like I was just talking about. And it could be arrogance, it can be cockiness, it can be all these kind of things as well, but they're counterproductive negative emotions. These counterproductive negative emotions drain us, but they're also 3D ego, and we want to live in the higher frequencies of divine mind, which is housed in the physical body. And then number 4, ways of being, a code, a creed, a doctrine, whatever you might want to call it, but a code and ways of being that nurture the inner you. Because when you nurture the inner you, you become stronger. And when you become stronger, you simultaneously become stronger. And then at some point, we flip and we start living from the inside as opposed to the outside. And then we're living in meditation 24/7. Final caveat. As I said, I've been on this path 28 years, and I find that the more that I learn, the less that I know. I ain't kidding. That's why I understand clearly that ignorance is bliss. But the more that I know and the more that I know that I need to know, the less that I know and the more work that I have to do. I, like the rest of us, I'm learning my lessons, I'm living my lessons, and I'm the only one on the planet that can do this for me. Meaning my own spiritual growth. No one can do it for me. So everything I'm sharing with you, I have to, and I have for many years, and I'm still working on some of it, maybe more than I want to admit sometimes, but I'm working on it. We all have our work to do. That being said, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you over on the next episode or another episode. Bye-bye.